If I can quote what a pessimistic and acidly sarcastic Kermit the Frog might say if called upon to address this moment at the start of The Muppet Show, nuclear paranoia is back! Yay! Last week, the most watched movie on Netflix was Catherine Bigelow's A House of Dynamite, a dramatization of the events surrounding a nuclear strike launched against the United States. Several days after that film's streaming debut, in yet another exasperating example of what it's like when someone who can't read tries to read the room, President Trump announced his intention for the United States to resume nuclear testing, which it hasn't done since 1992. Does Trump even watch Netflix? If he ever does, I assume it's by accident. He clicks over one tile too far when he's trying to put Fox News on his smart TV and winds up watching half a season of The Diplomat before one of his aides comes in, finds him in a panic, and has to calm him down and reassure him that it's not real and he hasn't actually been replaced as president by Lenny from Laverne and Shirley. He probably hasn't seen The Diplomat. I'm fairly sure he hasn't seen A House of Dynamite. Not as sure as I am that he's never seen Citizen Kane, but fairly sure. If the release of the movie and Trump's announcement about nuclear testing are related at all, my guess is it's because he overheard someone talking about the movie, figured out generally what it's about, and thought to himself, nuclear. Nuclear's hot right now, and took it from there because that's how his atrophying brain works. This past Wednesday, Trump posted on his Truth Social account, quote, "The United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. This was accomplished, including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term in office. Because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated to do it, but had no other choice. Russia is second, and China is a distant third, but will be even within 5 years. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis." Remember, the Department of War is what they're all pretending the Department of Defense is called now, even though there hasn't officially been a U.S. government agency called the Department of War for almost 80 years, because calling it the Department of War makes them feel like tough guys. How long do you figure this rebrand will last before they start selling the naming rights? Pretty soon it'll be Lockheed Martin presents the Department of War. Only that should probably be the other way around, shouldn't it? Anyway, Trump ends his social media post with, quote, "That process will begin immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter." And he closes with President Donald J. Trump in all caps, like an 11-year-old trying to sound impressive in an email. Trump announcing that he wants to resume testing nuclear weapons raises the obvious question, why did we ever stop testing them in the first place? Well, a little over 30 years ago, after several decades of everyone on planet Earth living in fear of nuclear war, it was so bad even Superman got involved at one point, the leaders of the nuclear-armed nations decided to stop testing nuclear weapons. This decision went along with a broader effort toward denuclearization. That didn't mean we got rid of the nukes altogether. To date, South Africa is the only nation to have independently developed nuclear weapons and then dismantled its entire nuclear arsenal. Denuclearization meant reducing the size of existing nuclear arsenals and discouraging countries that didn't have nukes already from developing or obtaining them. The Soviet Union ran its last nuclear weapons test in 1990. Its nuclear arsenal was taken over by the government of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The U.S. conducted its last nuclear weapons test in 1992, and China conducted its last nuclear weapons test in 1996. Since the turn of the century, the only nation that has conducted nuclear weapons tests is North Korea, which is one reason why most of the rest of us don't like North Korea very much. But wait, some of you who didn't zone out as soon as I started reading that post from Trump might be saying, didn't Trump say that the reason he wants to start testing our nuclear weapons again is because other countries are testing theirs? That is, in fact, what he said, but it will probably not surprise very many of you to learn that actually, that's not really true. Russian President Vladimir Putin did recently announce that his government had tested a new nuclear-powered torpedo, the Poseidon, and another new Russian weapon, a nuclear-powered cruise missile called the Burevestnik, was tested a few days before that announcement. But while both the Poseidon and the Burevestnik are fearful weapons that could be used to launch nuclear attacks, their tests did not involve setting off a nuclear explosion. Testing a weapon that could be used to deliver a nuclear bomb is not the same as a nuclear weapons test. That doesn't mean it's good. It's not. But it's not what Trump characterized it to be, and it's not the same sort of thing Trump says he wants to start doing. Testing a nuclear weapon involves, well, literally that. Setting off a nuclear weapon under controlled conditions, recording and studying the result to better understand how the weapon works, what it does, what effects it can be expected to have if deployed in a non-test situation. Before live weapons testing was ended in the 90s, the United States tested its nukes at a site in the Nevada desert, about 60 miles from Las Vegas. Starting in the early 1960s, those tests were conducted underground. A nuke would be positioned at the bottom of a deep shaft dug into the ground. The shaft would be sealed, the nuke would be triggered, and the surrounding rock would contain the blast. If we do actually resume nuclear testing, this site in Nevada is the only place we could do it. Well, correction, given whose idea this whole thing is, the site in Nevada is the only place we could do it safely, assuming safety is a concern. There are many excellent reasons why we shouldn't resume nuclear testing. At the top of my list is that Trump wants to do it. After 10 years of living with him as a national political figure and having to see him on TV every goddamn day babbling about whatever bullshit is on his mind, I just assume if he wants to do something, we shouldn't do it. Saves time. But there are other reasons as well. Underground testing was safer than atmospheric testing, but it still carried risks. And if it were resumed today, those risks would be even greater than they were 30 years ago when testing was stopped. Jeff Broomfield reported on this for NPR last week, and in his story he spoke with, among other experts, Corey Hinderstein, who works on nuclear policy for the nonpartisan think tank, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Here's a relevant section of that story. Quote, "In the past, some radioactive fallout has leaked from test shafts. Additionally, the test could shake buildings as far away as Las Vegas, and Hinderstein said some of the newer buildings in Vegas could even be at risk of damage. All of these big high-rises, including Stratosphere, including the Trump Hotel," she said, "they're not designed for massive, significant seismic activity. Another reason not to resume nuclear testing is that it's not actually necessary. The justification for testing in the past was that it was necessary to maintain the arsenal, to make sure the weapons themselves and the systems in place to manage and use them are working the way they're supposed to. But now that kind of maintenance is carried out through computer simulations and other forms of testing that don't involve actually setting off a nuke." From a bit further on in that same NPR article, quote, "Although a full-scale nuclear detonation would be complementary to current experiments, our assessment is that there are no system questions that would be answered by a test that would be worth the expense and the effort and the time," Don Haynes, a nuclear weapons scientist from Los Alamos National Laboratory, told NPR. And yet another reason not to resume testing is that doing so would be needlessly provocative. Part of why this kind of testing was stopped to begin with was to lower the temperature a little. Maybe, or so it was thought by some, if we stop setting off nukes so often, it'll help to kind of calm everybody down and make it easier to get along and easier to talk about what we should do with all these nukes we've got other than use them on each other. The problem is, none of this means anything to Trump. He doesn't care why we stopped doing nuclear testing. He probably thinks it was woke. He doesn't care about the risks involved. He doesn't care that it would serve no useful purpose, and he doesn't care that his stated justification for wanting to resume testing, that other countries are also doing nuclear weapons testing, isn't based in fact. For Trump, this is just another opportunity to project strength. Like everything else about him, this is performative, which doesn't mean it shouldn't be worried about. I'm actually a little surprised it's taken this long for nuclear weapons-related anxiety to come to the cultural forefront while Trump was in office. The thought of a man as ignorant, incompetent, gullible, and impulsive as Trump having his finger on the button has been a cause of some concern all along, but I think most of us have managed to push it to the back of our minds over the last decade, and we've had plenty of help in doing that from Trump himself, who has provided an endless series of exhausting distractions. Donald Trump having the power to end the world is a fact that should worry us. Trump can't be trusted with the nuclear football. Shit, Trump can't be trusted to run the concession stand at a football game. You know, first chance he gets, he's out of there, and all the money in that cash register is going with him. But maybe, if it gets us to think a little more than we have been about the broader problem of nuclear proliferation, it could turn out to be a good thing. Assuming we survive long enough to make it a good thing and the motherfucker doesn't start a nuclear war, I mean. Obviously. I grew up in the final years of the Cold War. I never experienced nuclear paranoia to the level that my parents did when they were growing up in the 60s, but I remember being aware that nuclear war was a possibility, that my country had a large stockpile of weapons capable of wiping out human civilization in a few minutes, and other countries had similar stockpiles, and we didn't all get along. If you look at the popular culture I was surrounded by in the 80s and 90s, you see lots of examples of how that nuclear paranoia lingered on. Movies like War Games and The Day After, the previously alluded to Superman 4, where the Man of Steel himself tries to prevent nuclear war by chucking a bunch of nukes into the sun, the Terminator franchise, which used the looming threat of a thermonuclear judgment day as motivation for its heroes, even the generally optimistic Star Trek franchise presented World War III, a nuclear conflict that killed hundreds of millions of people, as a part of its fictional history. I didn't necessarily expect it to happen any day, but when I was a kid, it was still treated as almost a foregone conclusion that someday, somehow, there was going to be a nuclear war. And when it happened, that would just about wrap it up for this whole humanity thing we've had going these last few 100,000 years. I'm glad people younger than I am haven't had to come of age with that kind of fear hanging over their heads. Just as I'm grateful that what I had to deal with was much less intense than what my parents were, excuse the expression, bombarded with when they were kids. I only wish the actual threat had gone away, along with the fear. Instead, what seems to have happened was the fear of nuclear war went away, largely because we all tacitly agreed to stop thinking and talking about it so much. A House of Dynamite is a very good movie, by the way. If you haven't watched it yet, I recommend it. Well made, obviously. Catherine Bigelow directed it, and she's a master at telling this sort of a story. Well acted by a superb cast, full of familiar faces like Rebecca Ferguson, Jason Clarke, Greta Lee, Jared Harris. If you're like me, you're always thrilled when Jared Harris turns up in something, and always disappointed he's not in it more. And Idris Elba as the President of the United States. By the way, congrats to the producers for casting Idris Elba as an intelligent, engaged, thoughtful, and capable President of the United States, and in doing so, making the fucking nuclear attack only the second most depressing thing about the movie. Also, the target of the nuclear weapon launched in the movie turns out to be Chicago. As I was watching, I thought, shit, someone's nuking Chicago? Trump is taking his grudge against Obama a little far, don't you think? Sorry. I shouldn't put that out there. It'll only give him ideas.